Hello, I'm Kathy with the Traveling Homesteader in Gyroscope Farm. Today we're going to be doing a simple tomato sauce to can. And since we've been doing canning in a couple of other videos, I'll just show you how I cook my sauce recipe, and then I'll put it in pint jars for canning. So if you're interested in seeing other canning that I've done, you can see some other videos that I did with blueberry pie filling and with some peach jam and some peaches. So I won't do the canning part again just since I've done it before and you can see that in other videos, but I'll show you my simple recipe for making tomato sauce. And what I've done today is I've actually gone and gotten a couple of flats of tomatoes from my local farm because the deer were kind enough to eat just about my whole garden. And I'm down to 2 tomato plants left and they're being really late. So I ended up getting about 40 pounds of a combination of tomatoes, just what I call regular tomatoes or slicing tomatoes, and then also about 20 pounds of Roma tomatoes. These together will create hopefully a nice thick tomato sauce. And the Romas, or the Roma varieties, usually look about this shape and are really good for making tomato sauce because they thicken up as they cook. And these add a little bit more body, but they do stay a little bit more fluid. So together, hopefully we'll have a really nice kind of sauce. And as I was doing some couponing, I noticed that there's a coupon in this week's circular for $3 off a particular brand of tomato sauce. And I thought, gads, $3 off? How much is that particular brand above that if they can take that much off? And I thought, I bet I can make my tomato sauce for that amount or less per jar. And I got thinking, between the tomatoes that I bought, along with, and I'm going to show you a doozy of an onion, with 1 onion. This is 1 onion. And I'll probably use just this one for my whole set of sauce. And then I ended up getting some garlic as well. And the garlic you can get in cloves like this, or you can get already chopped. But then I also have some freshly grown rosemary that I literally just picked out of one of my containers. And then I got a bunch at my local store of basil, because I ended up using all my basil that I grew for pesto. And I'm figuring this is about 5 plants worth of basil, and I'll be taking the leaves off, slicing them up and putting them in, and I'll show you how I do that here in a minute. But with these items, along with my peppers that I got, I ended up getting these really nice big peppers that I'll also be putting in. Again, 2 for $1 at my local farmer's market. It's a local farm stand. These things are huge. 2 for $1, and these will last a whole potload. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually split my tomatoes in half, so half will be tomato sauce and half will be salsa. So with that in mind, I'm averaging that my particular pints of tomato sauce will cost approximately $1.50 to $2 per jar, which is less than the amount off of the coupon that I saw in today's circular. And I'm amazed that we can do that. And all of this is locally grown. All I had to do was go literally about 10 miles, and that's where it was grown. And I can make it here at my own house and have it be all fresh and good for me. And who knows what other preservatives might be in that particular brand's tomato sauce. So that's in part why I've decided to make my own tomato sauces, because I can make it in a way that I like, and that offers me kind of more close to home products. So with that in mind, and for today's recipe, I just go with kind of a gut feeling, so to speak, and there's going to be a little bit of a combination. First, I'm going to be sauteing some onions, garlic, and herbs. My herbs that I'm doing are just the basil that I'll cut up, and the rosemary. The rosemary, I will take the sprigs, these little pieces off, but I'll also put in the stem, but I'll take the stem out after it's cooked. The stems usually have a lot of good flavor in it that you can use. And so as we go along, you'll see kind of I do things to add a little bit more flavor to my sauce. And I try to not use a whole lot of salt because growing up, my mom has always had high blood pressure. So what I do is I usually try not to add salt as I'm cooking, but then when I go to eat it, I'll add a little salt then. And that usually pans out just because I don't know kind of who's going to eat the sauce. Is my mom going to eat it and she has to watch her salt intake, or are other people who may not have salt anyway? So with that in mind, let's get started and see how our sauce comes along. So first, what I'm going to do is just take my pot and I'm going to add, I'm going to be using some olive oil. This happens to be from Costco, so it's a Kirkland brand. It's the organic extra virgin olive oil that I had for another recipe for baking bread. So to my pot, I'm just going to add this oil, and to be honest, I'm going to add a fair amount. I'm going to probably add about a quarter to half a cup in my pot, because with the amount of sauce I'll be making, this will help add some flavor, but also I'll be sauteing my onions and my garlic in it at first. So that's why I'm going to be adding about a quarter to half a cup of olive oil. Then from there, I'll heat that up, and then I'll add my garlic, and I'll end up helping that kind of bloom, but then I'll be adding things as I go. From this view, you can see the olive oil and rosemary that I've added to my pot. I've left the stem in to help with added flavor. By doing this, you'll get flavor that you can't get otherwise. Now, I'm slicing the pile of basil leaves into what you might call a chiffonade, just this thinly sliced basil. Not only does this add flavor, but it ends up enabling you to cook your basil quite evenly. Now I'll add it to the pot, and then I'll section out each portion of garlic. I'll do this without actually taking the paper peelings off yet. I'll start by taking one section of garlic and a broad-based knife, and I'll simply smash it. So as you can see here, I've sectioned out one clove, taking my large knife and simply pressing down and smashing it. By doing this, I can then take the paper peelings away and put it right in the pot with the other ingredients. Since this onion is so large, I'm simply going to cut it in half before I start peeling the outer layer of skin. By doing it this way, it helps me handle it a little bit better. But I'll take my knife and help me peel it, starting at the top of the onion. And as you can see, by taking the top tip and pulling away, I can then take the remaining section of skin off. Now, not all onions will have the same amount of skin to it, so it may be a little bit different. But essentially, it's simply the outer layers of skin, because all you'll be needing is the actual white portion of the onion, not the brown portion that you can see here. And you'll see down at the bottom that I actually took a little bit of the root away as well. So with that in mind, I'll start by simply taking off that brown portion, and then I'll start to cut in the opposite direction towards the root into smaller segments. But I won't cut all the way down to the root. You may have seen this sort of thing on other cooking channels that other chefs will do. This is one way to cut an onion more simply and quickly, but I tend to go a little slower with such a big knife and a large onion. So once this is fully cut through there, I'll turn it the opposite way and then start cutting in layers in this direction. So as you see, it comes quickly and easily off the knife, and once this is all cut, I can then put it in my pot. Once the onion's been fully cut, this is what it looks like. Each of the pieces are similar in size to help with even cooking distribution. Next, I'll be cutting into my pepper. I'll simply cut the top off, and then I'll take the seeds out. This is one way to cut your peppers open. There are several ways, but this is how I sometimes do it. And then I'll be taking out the white ribs with the seeds on them. We don't need the rib parts, and since the seeds aren't hot, they don't really add any flavor like a jalapeno pepper would. So then I would next cut it in half. After cutting it in half, I'll take each section and cut it into thin slices. And as you see, I try to keep the slices similar in size. From here, I'll be then cutting it into smaller sections, similar to the onion. But I try to make sure that each of the sections will be able to be cut in a way that will make it easier for cooking. So now that I've finished the slices, I can bring them together and will then cut the curved end first, although you can go to the other end if you like. And by doing it this way, it helps me hold it a little bit better. As I get them down to about 1/4 inch in size, I simply get it all the way through to the end, and will then put this portion in the pot. And then I'll do the same thing to the other half of the pepper. I'll do this to 2 peppers. For this recipe, I used 2 bell peppers, red and green, although you could add a jalapeno pepper if you like. As you can probably hear and maybe see, I have this, the garlic, the rosemary, the basil, and the olive oil all cooking here. And after crushing the garlic whole into flat pieces, it's going to be cooked down nicely with the other ingredients, but still infuse the flavor into the sauce. And so we're going to let this cook out for a little bit so that we can let all the aromatics actually fully cook in to the flavor of our sauce. And hopefully we'll be able to taste that a little bit better in the sauce once it's finally done. But the next step, what we're going to do, is we're actually going to be cutting down our tomatoes, both the Romas and the regulars that I showed you before, and we're going to put them all in here once this is kind of cooked down for a bit. So I'm going to let this cook out for maybe another minute or so, maybe 2 minutes, and that way that'll help with getting the flavors in. As you can see, we have our garlic and our olive oil and all our herbs in here, which is going to be really tasty, and it actually smells rather wonderful. But as you can see, there's the rosemary stems that I've left in there, and I'll be taking that out shortly before I add the tomatoes. So while the peppers and onions and garlic and herb mix are cooking together, I wanted to point out that I did take out the stems, these big stems of the rosemary. Now, part of the reason why I wanted to put it in there initially was to help with some added flavor, but now that it's not really needed, I'm not going to have it in there throughout the cooking process. There are some bigger chunks of the rosemary that I will take out afterwards because they still have a little bit of the stem, but they have a lot of the seasoning flavor of the rosemary that I want to keep in there. So while this is kind of cooking away, you can kind of hear it probably. It's starting to smell really good too. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start cutting the tomatoes a little bit so that I'm prepared to have them go in. Now, there are some different ways that people will prepare their sauces and salsas. You can blanch these like I've blanched the peaches that I showed in another clip, but you don't have to. Some people prefer not to have the skins of the tomatoes, but sometimes it just depends on your time and how you feel you want to just put it in there. There is some nutritional value to the skins, but sometimes they can peel up and show different things. But to prevent that, I'm going to actually blend it in the end. And so I'm just going to, once it's all cooked out, I'm going to just put it in my blender, whiz it up, and then I'm going to put it in my cans to can it. So these are some different options that you can do if you like. So at this point you can blanch these and take the skins off, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to take the cores off, and I'm going to cut any bad pieces out. So like any imperfections that you might consider, or like these different skin blemishes, something like that can be taken out and not cooked into it. But otherwise, you can leave pretty much all other things on. So with that in mind, getting it dirty already. So I just took off those little blemishes. I'll take off this top piece, and you can use a tomato corer to do this, or you can simply just dive in like that with a knife and splunk it out. And now, since this is cooked down a little bit and it's taken its time to kind of do its part, I'm gonna put my lid off to the side, stir this up a bit, and I did add a little bit more olive oil just for in case, and it's cooked down really nicely, and you can see here in just a moment the nice colors that's coming out of it. So on a nice hot pan, I will just cut my tomatoes right into it. Now you don't have to worry about universal size, but just as long as your tomato is cut down to size, because they will cook down pretty well, and you just want to make sure that you have the ability to cook them. And from this point, once we get all our tomatoes in, we're going to be cooking this for probably an hour or so. So we're going to cook it down for probably at least an hour. So that's probably not something you want to stick around on film for. So we'll check in on it and see how it goes. But as it cooks, between the regular tomatoes, I call them regular tomatoes, there are a number of varieties that you can use. And then the Romas will help things thicken up. As you can see, these tomatoes have a little bit more liquid in them, the seedy part, and that's just fine. I gotta tell you, I tasted these and they're pretty great. But the Romas have a little bit more meat to them. And as we look at them, again, this is the Roma. We'll take off the top. We can also just flatly take it out. We can see that within the Roma, while there are seeds, there is more meat to it as well. So that's the important part to notice too, that the meatiness of the Roma is what's going to help thicken up the sauce. So we will also add some salt now, but I will tell you, I don't add a lot of salt to my canning items, only because my mom, as I might have mentioned before, has high blood pressure, and over the years she has a tendency to have taught me along the way to not add much salt to items until we have it. So while I do prefer in my own meals more salt, I don't make it my initial items with too much, just because of the way I was taught. So you can add more now or later. It all depends on what your preference is. So with that in mind, we'll get more of these tomatoes put in, and we'll see how the sauce turns out, and I'll give you some some updates as we go. As you can see, it's cooking away, and as it settles down, it'll start to thicken up. There won't be as much of the liquid there. So just keep cooking and be patient, and the sauce will come together. So now that I've gotten my tomatoes all cut up, I have approximately 20 pounds of tomatoes between the Romas and the other types of tomatoes, the non-paste tomatoes, all cut up in my 20-quart stock pot. And now this is approximately 1.5 inches from the top of my stock pot, and it's going to be cooking down now for a while. But as you can see, it's still a little bit chunky, but it's percolating. And as I stir it, it's been cooking down ever since I started the onions in. So it's starting to come together, and as you can see, there's still chunks of different things. There's the tomatoes, the garlic, the onions, the peppers, and now it's time for it all to come together and perk. So as this perks together, all the seasonings will come together and hopefully produce a really great tomato sauce. Now by the end, this amount of tomatoes will cook down to be about 3/4 to half a pot. So it's going to become really concentrated in tomato flavor too. So as at our next stop, we should have a nice looking sauce to put in our canning jars. Hey there, so we're back with the tomato sauce after it's been perking down a little bit. And I have gotten it so it's cooked down a fair amount, but it's still not quite as thick as I'd like it. But as you can see, it still has a lot of the pieces to it from when I first cut everything up. So at this point, I'm going to be actually taking out, putting it in the blender and blending it together. And after that, I'll put it back in the pot and let it cook down some more. By doing that, it helps refine the actual sauce and have it come together a little bit better, but also it'll allow it to cook some more before I can it. And as I can it, I'll be either putting it in these pint jars, since I'm just a single person and I probably won't use a quart at a time. I'm gonna put my tomato sauce in pint jars, but I've also been thinking about putting it in my other batch back here. These are 3/4 pints, which I thought was kind of cool, and I didn't really realize were there. I'd seen them once in a while, but so these are just a size difference. And so depending on what you're canning, you can also do the 3/4 pint, or even there's so there's half pint jars. So we have half pint jars, 1/4 pint or 3/4. These are 3/4 pints, and then we have pints. So by having these three sizes, they all use the same size lids, I should say, and rins, but they're just different sizes. And then beneath, there is actually one size smaller than the half pint, is a 1/4 pint, which is kind of handy too. So if you want to give different sizes of things in jars, that's a great opportunity. So I may also do a couple in these 3/4 pints, just to see how they go and if that's an appropriate serving for what I use. Normally what I've done is put my tomato sauce in pint jars though. But when we do this, remember that we're going to have different canning times for different sizes. So just make sure you look at the right canning time for what you're canning in what size jar. Usually the pint jars are about half an hour, and then the larger sizes are about 40 minutes. So with that in mind, now that we've kind of talked about some a way to make tomato sauce, the next step that you're going to see is when I have it fully blended and cooked down a little bit more. And then we'll be all ready to can. So now that I've blended up my tomato sauce, it's rather nice and smooth. There are some things that didn't get fully blended, but that's okay. I don't mind the little added texture that'll come from it. So this is what it looks like. It's still nice and warm, and so you can get the added effects in the screen. But at this point, I will point out that because of the acidity in tomatoes these days, they don't have enough acidity always to have the proper seal in the canning jar. So at this point, while I cook it down again, I will be adding actually a little bit of some white vinegar, and this will help give it more acidity. You can use white vinegar or you could use lemon juice. Either way, both are fine and don't really adjust in the taste of the sauce. But I also was able to taste this before, and it tastes great, but I will add some more salt as well. So I'll be adding about 1/4 cup of the white vinegar right now. And then I will also be adding a little bit of salt. And again, as I've mentioned, I don't usually add that much salt. In fact, I probably add a lot less than most do, only because of the way I was raised with my mom having high blood pressure. So while I do have the Morton iodized salt, I'll just be putting in probably I just usually sprinkle it in. And this is going to be about maybe a tablespoon for the whole batch. So not much. I don't put a lot in overall, so it's only really a tablespoon for about, I'd say 15 quarts or 15. I'll probably end up getting about 15, 18 pints of my tomato sauce that I have about a tablespoon of salt to. And maybe that's more than I need, but that's for right now. For this amount, I think it'll do. So with that in mind, I'm going to cook it down some more, and then I'll can it. And this is where I'm going to actually leave you, since I've already done some other canning. Just remember that when you put in the canning jars, to make sure, whatever size you use, that you have the solid lid, you have the rims, so you have these two parts here, but that you also remember to clean the rims and just over the lip, but that you leave about ½ an inch of headspace, so you can only fill to about here to allow it to expand and contract, and then you're going to can it in a water bath canner for about ½ an hour. But again, remember the size may vary depending on or the time may vary depending on what size jar you use. So always look that up. You can check in with ball.com, or you can look at the Blue Book, the Ball Blue Book, or you can check in a variety of different places for your local altitude. And remember, altitude will change how long you'll can for. So with that in mind, keep on checking in with how we're doing on Gyroscope Farm and the Traveling Homesteader. And remember, click below if you want to subscribe. And if you have any pointers or ideas on how you make your tomato sauce, I'd be interested to know. Because as a Irish-Lithuanian kid, I don't think I have the corner market on tomato sauce like the Italians do. So if you have a secret, let me know. And I hope you have a great day.